Question 1. Stakeholder feedback indicates that applicants for a West Virginia concealed handgun license are sometimes uncertain about the extent of personal history disclosure required. An applicant in West Virginia has a minor misdemeanor conviction from over 10 years ago that was dismissed and expunged. They are concerned this might negatively impact their application. What is the best approach for this applicant when completing the West Virginia concealed handgun license application? Option A. Only disclose the dismissed and expunged misdemeanor conviction if specifically asked about it in a follow-up question. Option B. Fully disclose the dismissed and expunged misdemeanor conviction on the application, providing any supporting documentation requested by the West Virginia State Police. Option C. Disclose the dismissed and expunged misdemeanor conviction, but only after consulting with an attorney and being advised that disclosure is absolutely mandatory. Option D. Omit the dismissed and expunged misdemeanor conviction from the application, believing it is irrelevant due to its dismissal and expungement. Correct answer is B. Fully disclose the dismissed and expunged misdemeanor conviction on the application, providing any supporting documentation requested by the West Virginia State Police. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to balance their right to privacy with the legal requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun license in West Virginia. The applicant's personal circumstances, while potentially sensitive, must be disclosed accurately and completely to the West Virginia State Police as mandated by law. Failure to do so can lead to denial of the license and potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to determine what information is legally relevant and how to present it truthfully without unnecessary oversharing. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves providing all information requested on the West Virginia Concealed Handgun License application form, including any required declarations regarding past legal issues, even if the applicant believes they were minor or resolved favorably. This approach is correct because West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4A1 requires applicants to provide full information and answer all questions truthfully on the application. The state police are legally authorized to investigate all aspects of an applicant's background to determine eligibility. By providing complete and truthful information, the applicant demonstrates compliance with the law and respects the investigative process. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing only information that the applicant deems relevant or believes will not negatively impact their application is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to comply with West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4A1's mandate for full information and truthful answers. It constitutes a misrepresentation or omission, which can be grounds for denial of the license and may have further legal consequences. Failing to disclose any past legal issues, even minor ones, because the applicant believes they were resolved or are irrelevant, is also professionally unacceptable. This directly violates the requirement for truthful disclosure under West Virginia law. The state police have the discretion to determine the relevance of past legal issues, and withholding such information prevents them from making an informed decision. Consulting with an attorney to understand the legal implications of past issues before applying, but then only disclosing what the attorney advises is strictly necessary, can also be problematic if it leads to selective disclosure. While legal counsel is advisable, the ultimate responsibility for truthful and complete disclosure rests with the applicant as per West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4A1. If the attorney's advice leads to omissions of information requested on the application, it still constitutes a failure to provide full information. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking a concealed handgun license in West Virginia should approach the application process with a commitment to transparency and accuracy. The decision-making process should prioritize understanding the legal requirements of West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4. This involves carefully reading and answering every question on the application form truthfully and completely. If an applicant is unsure about the relevance or disclosure of specific past events, seeking clarification from the West Virginia State Police directly or consulting with legal counsel specializing in firearms law is recommended. The overarching principle is to provide all requested information without omission or misrepresentation, allowing the authorities to conduct their statutory review. Question 2. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to clarify the appropriate actions for a West Virginia concealed handgun license holder who witnesses a potential crime in progress while in a public place. If a CHL holder observes individuals attempting to break into a vehicle, what is the most responsible and legally sound course of action? Option A. Draw their concealed handgun to deter the individuals from continuing their actions and verbally command them to stop. Option B. Observe the situation from a safe distance. Note identifying details of the individuals and the vehicle they are attempting to break into, and immediately contact the West Virginia State Police or local law enforcement to report the incident. Option C. Approach the individuals to verbally warn them that they are being observed and that the police have been or will be notified. Option D. Continue walking past the scene without acknowledging or reporting the observed criminal activity. The correct answer is B. Observe the situation from a safe distance. Note identifying details of the individuals and the vehicle they are attempting to break into, and immediately contact the West Virginia State Police or local law enforcement to report the incident. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a CHL holder in West Virginia to balance their right to carry with the responsibility to act ethically and legally when encountering a situation that might involve a crime. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of intervention without exceeding the scope of their rights and responsibilities as a CHL holder, and without jeopardizing their own safety or the safety of others. Misjudging the situation or acting impulsively could lead to legal repercussions or unintended harm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves observing the situation, noting details, and immediately contacting law enforcement. This approach is correct because West Virginia law, while granting CHL holders the right to carry a concealed handgun for self-defense, does not obligate them to intervene in criminal activity. Their primary legal responsibility is to ensure their own safety and the safety of others through lawful means. Direct intervention without proper training or assessment of the threat could be construed as vigilantism or an unlawful use of force, even if the intent is to assist. Contacting the authorities allows trained professionals to handle the situation, ensuring a legal and safe resolution. This aligns with the ethical principle of acting within one's legal authority and competence. Incorrect approach is analysis. Intervening directly by drawing a concealed handgun and confronting the individuals, even if the intent is to deter the crime, is an incorrect approach. This action could escalate the situation, potentially leading to a violent confrontation where the CHL holder might be forced to use deadly force, or it could be perceived as an unlawful threat or assault by the individuals involved, regardless of their criminal actions. It exceeds the scope of a CHL holder's rights and responsibilities, which are primarily for personal defense. Approaching the individuals to verbally warn them about the potential crime and advise them to stop without drawing a weapon is also an incorrect approach. While seemingly less confrontational than drawing a weapon, it still involves direct intervention in a potentially dangerous situation. The CHL holder has no legal authority to order individuals to cease criminal activity, and such an approach could provoke an aggressive response, putting the CHL holder at risk and potentially escalating the situation beyond their control. Ignoring the situation and continuing to walk by without taking any action is an incorrect approach from an ethical standpoint, though not necessarily illegal. While a CHL holder is not obligated to intervene, witnessing a potential crime and doing nothing can be seen as a failure to act responsibly, especially if there is a reasonable opportunity to alert authorities without putting oneself at undue risk. The ethical consideration here is the balance between personal safety and a moral obligation to report potential harm to society. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and ethical responsibility. This involves 1. Situational assessment. Quickly and discreetly assess the nature and severity of the potential crime and the immediate risks involved. 2. Legal boundaries. Understand the scope of rights and responsibilities granted by the West Virginia CHL, focusing on self-defense and avoiding actions that could be construed as unlawful intervention. 3. Risk mitigation. Prioritize personal safety and the safety of others by avoiding direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary for self-defense. 4. Reporting protocol. Recognize the critical importance of immediately contacting law enforcement, providing clear and concise information. 5. Ethical considerations. Balance personal safety with a reasonable ethical obligation to report observed criminal activity. Question 3. Market research demonstrates that many applicants for a West Virginia concealed handgun license, CHL, may have varying levels of understanding regarding the specific legal definitions of lawful purpose and prohibited locations. Considering West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4, which of the following best reflects the applicant's responsibility in demonstrating their understanding of legal and ethical firearm carry? Option A. The applicant needs to be aware of general firearm safety principles and assume that any place not explicitly posted with a "no guns" sign is permissible for concealed carry. Option B. The applicant should focus on their personal belief in the right to carry a concealed handgun for any reason they deem necessary, as long as they are not actively engaged in criminal activity. Option C. The applicant must demonstrate a clear understanding of the statutory definition of lawful purpose, as it pertains to self-defense or the defense of others, and be able to identify specific locations where carrying a concealed handgun is prohibited under West Virginia law, such as schools and courthouses. Option D. The applicant should understand that having a CHL generally permits carrying a concealed handgun in most public places in West Virginia, with only a few obvious exceptions. The correct answer is C. The applicant must demonstrate a clear understanding of the statutory definition of lawful purpose, as it pertains to self-defense or the defense of others, and be able to identify specific locations where carrying a concealed handgun is prohibited under West Virginia law, such as schools and courthouses. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the nuances of West Virginia's concealed handgun laws, specifically concerning the definition of lawful purpose, and the potential for misinterpretation that could lead to legal repercussions. The applicant must demonstrate a clear understanding of when and where carrying a concealed handgun is permissible under West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could be construed as unlawful or threatening, even if not explicitly intended as such. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to the West Virginia Code regarding concealed carry. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership by ensuring the applicant knows the specific locations and circumstances where carrying a concealed handgun is permitted for a lawful purpose, such as self-defense or the defense of others, and understanding the prohibitions outlined in the statute. This aligns directly with the intent of the concealed handgun licensing process, which is to ensure individuals are knowledgeable about their rights and responsibilities under West Virginia law. An approach that relies on general assumptions about firearm carry rights or interprets lawful purpose too broadly is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to carrying a concealed handgun in prohibited areas, such as schools or courthouses, or during activities that could be misconstrued as unlawful, thereby violating West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4. Such an approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the specific legal framework governing concealed carry in West Virginia, potentially resulting in criminal charges. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to assume that a concealed handgun license automatically grants unrestricted carry rights. This overlooks the explicit limitations and prohibitions detailed within West Virginia law. Failing to recognize these restrictions can lead to unintentional violations, as the license is a permit to carry concealed under specific legal conditions, not a blanket authorization for all situations. The professional reasoning process for applicants should involve a meticulous review of the West Virginia Code, particularly sections pertaining to concealed carry. Applicants should seek clarification from official sources, such as the West Virginia State Police or legal counsel, if any aspect of the law is unclear. Prioritizing accurate knowledge of legal requirements over personal interpretations or assumptions is paramount to responsible and lawful firearm ownership. Question 4. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to assess an applicant's practical understanding of West Virginia's concealed handgun laws. If an applicant for a West Virginia concealed handgun license is asked to identify whether carrying a concealed handgun is permissible in a public elementary school building, which of the following responses best demonstrates the required knowledge of the law? Option A. Carrying a concealed handgun is prohibited in a public elementary school building. Option B. Carrying a concealed handgun is permissible in a public elementary school building unless there is a sign explicitly prohibiting firearms. Option C. A concealed handgun license allows the holder to carry a concealed handgun in any public elementary school building for personal protection. Option D. Carrying a concealed handgun is permissible in a public elementary school building if the applicant feels it is necessary for their safety. The correct answer is A. Carrying a concealed handgun is prohibited in a public elementary school building. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a nuanced understanding of West Virginia's concealed handgun laws beyond simple memorization. The applicant must apply knowledge of the legal framework to a practical, albeit hypothetical, situation involving a potential violation. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between lawful actions and those that could lead to legal repercussions or denial of their concealed handgun license. The best professional approach involves accurately recalling and applying the specific provisions of West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4, which outlines the locations where carrying a concealed handgun is prohibited. This approach prioritizes adherence to the letter of the law as it pertains to restricted areas, such as schools. By identifying that a school is a prohibited location, the applicant correctly demonstrates an understanding of the legal boundaries for carrying a concealed handgun in West Virginia. This aligns with the fundamental requirement for obtaining a CHL, demonstrating knowledge of and respect for the laws governing firearm possession. An incorrect approach would be to assume that carrying a concealed handgun is permissible in any location not explicitly marked with signage prohibiting firearms. West Virginia law does not rely solely on signage for prohibition. Rather, it enumerates specific locations where carrying is illegal regardless of signage. This approach fails to acknowledge the statutory prohibitions outlined in the West Virginia Code, potentially leading to a misunderstanding of legal responsibilities. Another incorrect approach would be to believe that a concealed handgun license automatically grants permission to carry a firearm in all public places without exception. The license signifies that the holder has met certain criteria, but it does not override specific statutory restrictions on where a firearm may be carried. This approach demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the scope and limitations of a CHL. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to consider personal safety as the sole determinant of where one can legally carry a concealed handgun, disregarding established legal restrictions. While personal safety is a primary motivation for seeking a CHL, the law dictates permissible locations, and these legal boundaries must be respected. This approach prioritizes personal judgment over legal mandates, which is unacceptable when seeking a license to carry a concealed weapon. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant statutes, specifically West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4. When faced with a question about permissible carry locations, the applicant should first identify the location described, and then cross-reference it with the statutory list of prohibited areas. If the location is listed as prohibited, the applicant must conclude that carrying a concealed handgun there is unlawful, regardless of other factors. This systematic approach ensures legal compliance and demonstrates the necessary knowledge for responsible firearm ownership. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows a West Virginia concealed handgun licensee is attending a community event held at a local public park. The licensee is aware that some public spaces have restrictions on carrying concealed handguns. Which of the following actions best demonstrates responsible adherence to West Virginia concealed handgun license requirements? Option A. The licensee researches the specific West Virginia statutes and local ordinances pertaining to carrying firearms in public parks and at community events before attending, and refrains from carrying if any ambiguity or prohibition exists. Option B. The licensee carries their concealed handgun, believing that their concealed handgun license grants them the right to carry in any public space. Option C. The licensee carries their concealed handgun, assuming that since the event is in a public park, it is permissible to do so. Option D. The licensee observes whether other attendees are openly carrying firearms and proceed based on that observation. The correct answer is A. The licensee researches the specific West Virginia statutes and local ordinances pertaining to carrying firearms in public parks and at community events before attending, and refrains from carrying if any ambiguity or prohibition exists. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a West Virginia concealed handgun licensee's understanding of firearm safety and legal responsibilities is paramount. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the licensee to balance personal safety concerns with strict adherence to West Virginia's concealed carry laws, specifically regarding the permissible locations for carrying a concealed handgun. Misinterpreting or disregarding these laws can lead to severe legal consequences, including license revocation and criminal charges. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4, which outlines prohibited places for carrying a concealed handgun. This code specifically lists locations such as schools, courthouses, and polling places on Election Day. A licensee demonstrating best practice would proactively research and confirm the legality of carrying a concealed handgun in any given location, especially in public buildings or at events where restrictions might apply. This proactive verification ensures compliance and avoids potential legal entanglements. An incorrect approach would be to assume that because a location is open to the public, it is permissible to carry a concealed handgun. This overlooks the specific statutory prohibitions in West Virginia law. Another incorrect approach is to rely on hearsay or the actions of others, such as observing other individuals carrying firearms, as a basis for determining legality. West Virginia law is specific, and individual responsibility for compliance rests with the licensee. Finally, an approach that prioritizes personal convenience over legal requirements, such as carrying a concealed handgun into a prohibited area because it feels safer or is more convenient, demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the licensee's obligations and the purpose of the concealed handgun laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and safety. This involves 1. Knowing the law. Familiarize yourself with all relevant West Virginia statutes regarding concealed carry. 2. Location verification. Before entering any location, especially those that are public or may have specific regulations, e.g., government buildings, schools, private property with posted signs. Confirm whether carrying a concealed handgun is permitted. Utilize official resources like the West Virginia State Police website or consult legal counsel if unsure. 3. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential risks associated with carrying a firearm in a particular environment, but always subordinate personal risk assessment to legal mandates. 4. Responsible action. If a location is prohibited, leave the firearm secured elsewhere or refrain from entering. Question 6. Regulatory review indicates that a West Virginia resident holding a valid concealed handgun license, CHL, is approached by a close friend who has recently moved to the state and is awaiting their own CHL application to be processed. The friend expresses a desire to carry a handgun for personal protection while hiking in a remote area and asks if they could borrow the licensee's handgun and permit for the duration of their hike, assuring the licensee that they are a responsible individual and will be extremely careful. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the West Virginia CHL holder? Option A. Politely decline the request, explaining that West Virginia law prohibits the lending or transfer of a concealed handgun and its permit, as the license is personal and non-transferable. Option B. Agree to lend the handgun and permit to the friend, instructing them to keep it concealed and to only present the permit if absolutely necessary. Option C. Offer to supervise the friend while they handle and fire the licensee's handgun at a private range, as a temporary measure until their own license is issued. Option D. Provide the friend with the handgun but keep the permit, advising them to carry the firearm discreetly. The correct answer is A. Politely decline the request, explaining that West Virginia law prohibits the lending or transfer of a concealed handgun and its permit, as the license is personal and non-transferable. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a direct conflict between a personal relationship and the strict requirements of West Virginia's concealed handgun laws. The licensee is obligated to uphold the integrity of their concealed handgun license and ensure compliance with all regulations, even when faced with a request from a close friend that might seem innocuous. The core ethical dilemma lies in balancing loyalty to a friend with the legal and ethical responsibilities of a licensed concealed handgun carrier. The correct approach involves prioritizing legal compliance and the integrity of the licensing process. This means politely but firmly declining the request, explaining that West Virginia law prohibits lending or transferring a concealed handgun or its permit to another individual. The licensee must understand that their license is personal and non-transferable, and any attempt to circumvent this by allowing a friend to use their firearm or carry it under the guise of their license would be a violation of West Virginia Code Section 61-7-7, which governs the unlawful possession of a handgun. Furthermore, ethical considerations dictate that the licensee should not place themselves or their friend in a position of legal jeopardy. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the request, perhaps believing that it is a minor favor among friends and that the friend is responsible. This action directly violates West Virginia Code Section 61-7-7, which explicitly prohibits the transfer or lending of a handgun or permit. Ethically, this demonstrates a disregard for the law and the responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed handgun, potentially endangering the public and undermining the credibility of the concealed handgun licensing system. Another incorrect approach would be to provide the friend with the firearm, but instruct them to keep it concealed and not to present the licensee's permit. This is still a violation because the firearm is being possessed by an individual who is not licensed to carry it, and the licensee is facilitating this illegal possession. West Virginia law requires that a person carrying a concealed handgun must be licensed and must present their license upon demand by a law enforcement officer. Allowing another person to carry the firearm, even without the permit being presented, still constitutes an unlawful act by the licensee in enabling the illegal carry. A final incorrect approach would be to suggest that the friend obtain their own concealed handgun license, but then to offer to help them by allowing them to practice with the licensee's firearm before they are licensed. While encouraging lawful firearm ownership is commendable, allowing an unlicensed individual to handle or fire a handgun, even under supervision, without proper training and adherence to West Virginia's specific firearm safety and legal carry regulations, can create a dangerous situation and does not absolve the licensee of responsibility for ensuring all legal requirements are met. The focus must remain on the friend obtaining their own legal authorization before any firearm possession or use occurs. Professionals should approach such situations by first recognizing the legal boundaries. They should then consider the ethical implications of their actions and how those actions might impact public safety and the integrity of the legal system. A clear, direct, and polite refusal, coupled with an explanation of the relevant legal prohibitions, is the most responsible course of action. If appropriate, the professional can offer to guide the friend through the legal process of obtaining their own license. Question 7. Performance analysis shows a West Virginia concealed handgun license holder is visiting a friend who expresses a strong desire to just hold the licensee's legally carried handgun, stating they are a responsible person and would never misuse it. The licensee knows their friend does not possess a West Virginia concealed handgun license. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee? Option A. Politely but firmly refuse the request, explaining that West Virginia law prohibits allowing an unlicensed individual to handle a concealed handgun. Option B. Downplay the request and agree to let the friend hold it, emphasizing the need for extreme caution. Option C. Allow the friend to hold the handgun for a brief moment, assuring them that it is safe and controlled. Option D. Offer to let the friend try the handgun at a local shooting range, assuming they will be supervised. The correct answer is A. Politely but firmly refuse the request, explaining that West Virginia law prohibits allowing an unlicensed individual to handle a concealed handgun. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal relationships with the strict legal requirements of carrying a concealed handgun in West Virginia. The licensee's duty is to uphold the law and ensure public safety, which can be complicated by personal loyalties or perceived obligations. The core ethical dilemma lies in whether to prioritize a friend's immediate request, which may violate legal statutes, or to adhere strictly to the law, potentially straining the friendship. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without compromising legal responsibilities or personal integrity. The correct approach involves a clear and firm adherence to West Virginia concealed handgun laws. This means politely but unequivocally refusing to allow the friend to handle the firearm, regardless of the relationship or the perceived safety of the situation. This approach is correct because West Virginia Code Section 61-7-7 prohibits allowing any person to carry a concealed handgun who is not licensed to do so. Furthermore, the licensee has a legal and ethical responsibility to prevent unauthorized access to their firearm. By refusing the request, the licensee upholds their legal obligation to secure their weapon and prevent its misuse by an unlicensed individual, thereby prioritizing public safety and legal compliance. An incorrect approach would be to allow the friend to hold the handgun, even for a brief moment, under the assumption that the friend is trustworthy or that the situation is controlled. This directly violates West Virginia Code Section 61-7-7 by allowing an unlicensed individual to handle a concealed handgun. Ethically, this action demonstrates a disregard for the law and the potential risks associated with unauthorized firearm handling, which could lead to serious legal consequences for both individuals and endanger others. Another incorrect approach would be to offer to let the friend try it out at shooting range without confirming if the friend possesses their own valid West Virginia CHL. This still risks violating the law if the friend is unlicensed and could be interpreted as facilitating the unlicensed handling of a firearm. The legal framework requires the licensee to ensure that any handling of their firearm by another individual is done in accordance with the law, which includes the other individual being legally permitted to do so. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to downplay the seriousness of the request and agree to let the friend hold the gun, perhaps with a casual remark like, "Just be careful." This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the strict legal liabilities involved and the potential for unintended consequences. It suggests a casual attitude towards firearm safety and legal compliance, which is unacceptable for a licensed concealed handgun holder. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above personal relationships or convenience. This involves 1. Immediately recognizing the legal implications of the request. 2. Clearly and politely stating the legal prohibition against allowing an unlicensed person to handle the firearm. 3. Offering alternative legal solutions if appropriate, e.g., suggesting the friend obtain their own CHL if they are interested in carrying. 4. Maintaining a firm stance on legal requirements, even if it causes temporary social discomfort. Question 8. The control framework reveals that a West Virginia resident has applied for a concealed handgun license and has requested training from a certified firearms instructor who is also a close personal friend. The instructor is aware that this personal relationship could be perceived as a conflict of interest. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the instructor in West Virginia? Option A. Proceed with the training and assessment, assuming the personal relationship will not influence their professional judgment. Option B. Advise the applicant to seek training from another instructor without disclosing the personal relationship to the licensing authority. Option C. Conduct the training and assessment as usual, but subtly ensure the applicant meets all requirements without explicitly mentioning the personal relationship. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the West Virginia licensing authority and recuse themselves from providing training and assessment for the applicant. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the West Virginia licensing authority and recuse themselves from providing training and assessment for the applicant. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between personal relationships and the strict legal requirements for concealed handgun licensing in West Virginia. The applicant's close personal relationship with the instructor creates a potential for bias, either conscious or unconscious, which could compromise the integrity of the training and assessment process. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the licensing process remains objective and adheres to the spirit and letter of West Virginia law, which prioritizes public safety through competent and unbiased training. The best professional approach involves the instructor immediately disclosing the personal relationship to the licensing authority and recusing themselves from the training and assessment of the applicant. This approach is correct because it upholds the principle of impartiality and transparency mandated by the West Virginia Code, specifically concerning the qualifications and training required for a concealed handgun license. West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4 outlines the requirements for a CHL, including the necessity of completing a firearms training course. While the code doesn't explicitly detail instructor-applicant relationships, the underlying ethical and legal imperative is to ensure that the training is conducted by an unbiased individual who can objectively assess the applicant's proficiency and understanding of firearm safety and the law. Disclosing the relationship and recusing oneself prevents any appearance of impropriety and ensures the applicant receives training and evaluation from an objective third party, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the licensing process and public trust. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the training and assessment while downplaying the relationship, believing it wouldn't affect the outcome. This fails to acknowledge the potential for perceived or actual bias, which can undermine the credibility of the training and the license itself. It also violates the ethical obligation of an instructor to maintain professional distance and objectivity, potentially leading to a situation where the applicant might be deemed competent without a truly impartial evaluation. Another incorrect approach is to assume the personal relationship is irrelevant and to conduct the training and assessment as if the applicant were a stranger. While seemingly neutral, this approach fails to proactively address the potential for conflict of interest and the appearance of favoritism. It misses an opportunity to demonstrate a commitment to the highest ethical standards and transparency, which are crucial in professions involving public safety and regulated activities. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the applicant to seek training from a different instructor without disclosing the personal relationship to the licensing authority. This is problematic because it avoids the direct ethical obligation of the instructor to be transparent about their own potential conflicts of interest. While the applicant might receive training, the instructor who has the conflict has not fulfilled their duty to report it, potentially leaving the licensing authority unaware of a compromised assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a proactive assessment of any potential conflicts of interest, no matter how minor they may seem. Professionals must prioritize transparency and adherence to regulatory requirements. When a personal relationship could be perceived as influencing professional judgment or the integrity of a regulated process, the most ethical and legally sound course of action is to disclose the relationship to the relevant authority and, if necessary, recuse oneself from the situation. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and ensures that regulated processes are conducted with fairness and impartiality. Question 9. Operational review demonstrates that a close friend, who is not a concealed handgun licensee in West Virginia, confides in you that they anticipate needing to carry a handgun for personal protection during an upcoming event, but have not yet obtained their license. Your friend asks if they can borrow your handgun for this specific event, promising to return it immediately afterward. Considering your responsibilities as a West Virginia concealed handgun licensee, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Offer to carry your handgun for your friend during the event, ensuring it is accessible to them if needed, but legally in your possession. Option B. Inform your friend that you cannot lend them your handgun because they do not possess a valid West Virginia concealed handgun license, and advise them on the proper legal procedures for obtaining one if they wish to carry a firearm. Option C. Lend your handgun to your friend for the duration of the event, with the understanding that they will return it to you promptly afterward. Option D. Advise your friend to keep the handgun in their vehicle during the event, where it would be accessible but not openly carried. The correct answer is B. Inform your friend that you cannot lend them your handgun because they do not possess a valid West Virginia concealed handgun license, and advise them on the proper legal procedures for obtaining one if they wish to carry a firearm. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal relationships with the strict legal and ethical obligations of a concealed handgun licensee. The licensee's duty to uphold the law and ensure public safety, as mandated by West Virginia concealed handgun laws, is paramount and cannot be compromised by personal feelings or perceived favors. The core conflict lies in the licensee's responsibility to act in accordance with the law versus the desire to assist a friend in a way that circumvents legal requirements. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the legal framework governing concealed carry in West Virginia. This means recognizing that the friend's lack of a valid permit renders any possession of a handgun by them illegal, regardless of the licensee's intent or the circumstances. The licensee's obligation is to inform the friend of the legal requirements and advise them to obtain a permit if they wish to carry a handgun legally. This upholds the integrity of the concealed handgun licensing system and prevents potential legal ramifications for both individuals, as well as ensuring public safety by only allowing legally permitted individuals to carry firearms, An incorrect approach would be to lend the handgun to the friend, even with the intention of retrieving it later. This action directly facilitates illegal possession of a firearm by an unlicensed individual, violating West Virginia's firearm laws. It also places the licensee in a position of complicity in a criminal act. Furthermore, it undermines the purpose of the concealed handgun licensing process, which is designed to ensure that individuals meet specific criteria before being entrusted with carrying a firearm. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the friend's request and avoid the situation altogether. While this might seem like a way to avoid direct involvement, it fails to address the underlying legal issue and potentially leaves the friend in a position to make a poor, illegal decision. A responsible licensee has an ethical obligation to uphold the law and, where appropriate, to educate others about it, especially when firearms are involved. A third incorrect approach would be to offer to carry the handgun for the friend in situations where the friend anticipates needing it, but cannot legally carry it themselves. This is essentially the same as lending the handgun, as it enables the friend to have a firearm readily accessible through an intermediary who is legally permitted to carry. This still facilitates illegal possession and use by the unlicensed individual and carries significant legal risks for the licensee. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a clear understanding of one's legal obligations as a concealed handgun licensee in West Virginia. This includes knowing the specific statutes related to firearm possession and concealed carry. When faced with a request that appears to skirt these laws, the licensee must prioritize legal compliance and public safety over personal relationships or perceived convenience. The decision-making framework should involve 1. Identifying the legal requirements relevant to the situation. 2. Evaluating the request against those legal requirements. 3. Communicating the legal realities clearly and ethically to the other party. 4. Refusing any action that would facilitate illegal activity. 5. Offering lawful alternatives or advice. Question 10. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a minor infraction occurring if a concealed handgun licensee, CHL, applicant is rushed through the background check process due to a perceived urgent need for the license. An applicant for a West Virginia CHL states they need their license immediately for personal protection due to a recent, credible threat. The standard background check process, as outlined in West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4, typically takes 45 days. If the average processing time for background check is 30 days, and the applicant's stated urgency is considered, what is the maximum number of additional days the background check can be legally extended beyond the average processing time before a decision must be made, assuming no disqualifying factors are found during the standard check? Option A, 45 days. Option B, 15 days. Option C, 30 days. Option D, 0 days. The correct answer is B, 15 days. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a minor infraction occurring if a concealed handgun licensee, CHL, applicant is rushed through the background check process due to a perceived urgent need for the license. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the applicant's stated urgency against the mandatory legal requirements for a thorough background investigation, as stipulated by West Virginia law. The pressure to expedite can lead to overlooking critical details, potentially compromising public safety. The best approach involves strictly adhering to the established procedural timelines for background checks, regardless of the applicant's perceived urgency. This means completing the full background investigation as mandated by West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. The law requires a specific time frame for the background check to ensure all necessary checks are performed, preventing individuals who are legally prohibited from possessing a firearm from obtaining a concealed handgun license. Ethical considerations also demand impartiality and adherence to established procedures, ensuring fairness to all applicants and upholding the integrity of the licensing process. An incorrect approach would be to bypass certain verification steps to expedite the process based on the applicant's claim of urgency. This is ethically unsound and legally impermissible, as it violates the spirit and letter of West Virginia's concealed handgun licensing statutes. Such an action could result in a prohibited person obtaining a license, creating a direct risk to public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to deny the license outright without completing the mandated background check, simply because the applicant expressed urgency. This is also a violation of due process and statutory requirements, as all applicants are entitled to a complete and fair review. Finally, attempting to interpret the law to allow for exceptions based on subjective urgency is a dangerous path that undermines the objective nature of legal requirements and can lead to inconsistent and potentially unsafe outcomes. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of all applicable statutes and regulations. When faced with pressure to deviate from established procedures, the professional should first consult the relevant West Virginia Code sections. If ambiguity exists, seeking guidance from a supervisor or legal counsel is paramount. The core principle should always be to uphold the law and ensure public safety, even if it means communicating to an applicant that the process cannot be expedited beyond the legally defined parameters. Question 11. Operational review demonstrates that a close personal friend is applying for a West Virginia concealed handgun license. You are in a position to review aspects of their application. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action to ensure compliance with West Virginia's concealed handgun licensing requirements? Option A. Offer the friend advice on how to best present their application to minimize scrutiny, subtly guiding them on how to address any potential issues that might arise during the background check. Option B. Ensure the friend's application is processed according to all standard West Virginia Code requirements, with no special consideration given due to the personal relationship, and maintain strict confidentiality regarding their application. Option C. Inform other colleagues about the friend's application and your personal connection, seeking their input on how to handle the situation, even if it means discussing sensitive application details. Option D. Expedite the friend's application review process, overlooking minor administrative details that might otherwise cause a delay, given the personal acquaintance. Correct answer is B. Ensure the friend's application is processed according to all standard West Virginia Code requirements, with no special consideration given due to the personal relationship, and maintain strict confidentiality regarding their application. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance personal relationships with the strict requirements of concealed carry laws and ethical conduct. The core of the challenge lies in upholding the integrity of the licensing process and ensuring public safety, even when faced with a personal connection to an applicant. Careful judgment is required to avoid any perception or reality of favoritism or compromise of the legal standards. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the West Virginia Code regarding concealed handgun licenses and the ethical guidelines for responsible firearm ownership and application processes. This means treating all applicants, regardless of personal acquaintance, with the same level of scrutiny and adherence to established procedures. Specifically, it requires the applicant to meet all statutory requirements independently, without any undue influence or assistance stemming from the personal relationship. This upholds the principle of equal application of the law and maintains the integrity of the licensing system, ensuring that only qualified individuals are granted a license. An incorrect approach would be to offer preferential treatment or to overlook minor discrepancies in the application due to the personal relationship. This could involve downplaying the significance of a past minor infraction that might otherwise be a disqualifying factor, or offering advice on how to circumvent certain requirements. Such actions would violate the spirit and letter of the West Virginia concealed handgun licensing laws, which are designed to ensure public safety by vetting applicants thoroughly. Ethically, it represents a conflict of interest and a breach of professional responsibility, potentially leading to the issuance of a license to an individual who may not fully meet the established safety and legal standards. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse to process the application solely because of the personal relationship, without any objective basis for disqualification. While avoiding conflicts of interest is important, outright refusal without cause can be seen as discriminatory and may not align with the legal obligations to process applications fairly. The focus should be on ensuring the applicant meets the legal criteria, not on avoiding the application altogether due to a personal connection. A further incorrect approach would be to disclose confidential information about the application process or the applicant's background to others, even if done with good intentions. The privacy of applicants is protected by law, and any unauthorized disclosure would be a serious ethical and legal breach. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal statutes and ethical principles. This involves a clear understanding of the relevant West Virginia Code provisions, a commitment to impartiality, and a proactive approach to identifying and managing potential conflicts of interest. When faced with a situation involving a personal acquaintance, the professional should first assess if the personal relationship creates any actual or perceived bias. If so, they should consider recusal from the decision-making process or seek guidance from a supervisor. The primary focus must always remain on the objective criteria established by law for licensing. Question 12. The assessment process for a West Virginia concealed handgun license application reveals that the applicant has a prior arrest for assault, though the charges were ultimately dismissed and no conviction was recorded. The applicant has otherwise met all statutory requirements for the license. How should the licensing authority proceed? Option A. Base the decision on the personal impression of the licensing officer regarding the applicant's demeanor during the application process. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the arrest record, any accompanying documentation, and the circumstances of the dismissal to determine if the applicant poses a risk to themselves or others, in accordance with West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4. Option C. Immediately approve the license, as the applicant has no disqualifying convictions. Option D. Automatically deny the license due to the prior arrest, regardless of the dismissal. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the arrest record, any accompanying documentation, and the circumstances of the dismissal to determine if the applicant poses a risk to themselves or others, in accordance with West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the legal right to carry a concealed handgun with the ethical responsibility to ensure public safety and avoid creating unnecessary alarm or perceived threats. The applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a conviction that would automatically disqualify them under West Virginia law, raises concerns about their judgment and temperament, which are crucial for responsible firearm ownership and concealed carry. Careful consideration of all available information is paramount. The best approach involves a thorough, objective review of all provided documentation, including the applicant's criminal history, any supporting statements, and the specific reasons for the prior arrest, even if it did not lead to a conviction. This approach is correct because West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4 outlines the criteria for issuing a concealed handgun license. While a conviction for certain offenses is an automatic disqualifier, the statute also allows for denial if the applicant is deemed likely to be a danger to themselves or others. A comprehensive review allows the licensing authority to assess this risk based on the totality of the circumstances, including past arrests that, while not resulting in conviction, may indicate a pattern of behavior or judgment that could pose a risk. This aligns with the ethical duty to protect the public. An approach that immediately approves the license based solely on the absence of a conviction fails to adequately assess the applicant's suitability and potential risk. This overlooks the discretionary power granted to licensing authorities to consider factors beyond mere convictions, potentially compromising public safety. Another incorrect approach is to automatically deny the license based on the arrest alone, without further investigation. This is a failure to follow due process and the specific requirements of West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4, which requires a more nuanced evaluation than a simple arrest-based disqualification. It also fails to consider any mitigating circumstances or evidence presented by the applicant. Finally, an approach that relies on personal feelings or assumptions about the applicant's character, rather than objective evidence and legal criteria, is ethically and professionally unsound. This introduces bias and deviates from the established legal framework for concealed handgun licensing. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective evidence, adherence to statutory requirements, and a thorough risk assessment. This involves gathering all relevant information, evaluating it against the legal criteria for licensure, considering any mitigating or aggravating factors, and making a decision that upholds both individual rights and public safety. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a West Virginia concealed handgun licensee, while at a public park, inadvertently left their holstered firearm unattended on a park bench for approximately 5 minutes before realizing their mistake and retrieving it. The licensee is now unsure of the proper course of action. Option A. Attempt to discreetly inquire with park staff if anyone reported finding a firearm. Option B. Wait a few days to see if the firearm is reported as found before taking any action. Option C. Assume the firearm was not seen by anyone and therefore no action is necessary. Option D. Immediately contact the local law enforcement agency to report the incident and follow their guidance. The correct answer is D. Immediately contact the local law enforcement agency to report the incident and follow their guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal ethical considerations with legal obligations and the safety of others. The license holder must make a judgment call that could have significant consequences, necessitating a careful and informed decision. The best approach involves prioritizing immediate safety and legal compliance by securing the firearm in a manner that prevents unauthorized access, while also fulfilling the legal requirement to report the incident. This aligns with the core principles of responsible firearm ownership and the legal framework governing concealed carry in West Virginia, which emphasizes secure storage and reporting of lost or stolen firearms. The West Virginia Code Section 61-7-7 outlines the requirements for reporting lost or stolen firearms, and responsible gun ownership ethics dictate that a firearm should never be left unsecured where it could be accessed by unauthorized individuals. An incorrect approach would be to delay reporting the incident or to attempt to retrieve the firearm without involving law enforcement. Delaying the report violates West Virginia Code Section 61-7-7, which mandates prompt notification to law enforcement. Attempting to retrieve the firearm without involving authorities could lead to further complications, potential legal issues if the firearm is found in a compromising situation, and could compromise the integrity of any potential investigation. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the firearm will be found and not report it, or to downplay the seriousness of the situation. This demonstrates a lack of responsibility and a disregard for the potential dangers posed by an unsecured firearm. It also directly contravenes the legal reporting requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate safety risk. This is followed by a thorough understanding of legal obligations, specifically the reporting requirements for lost or stolen firearms in West Virginia. Finally, ethical considerations regarding responsible firearm ownership and the potential impact on public safety should guide the chosen course of action. Question 14. Benchmark analysis indicates a West Virginia concealed handgun licensee is hosting a family gathering at their residence. A younger sibling of the licensee's spouse, who is a minor, expresses a strong interest in firearms and asks if they can try shooting the licensee's concealed handgun, which is currently unloaded and secured in a locked safe in a separate room. The licensee's spouse is present and suggests that the licensee could supervise the minor handling the unloaded handgun briefly. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the West Virginia concealed handgun licensee? Option A. Firmly decline the request, explaining that the handgun cannot be handled by anyone other than the licensee, and ensure the firearm remains secured and inaccessible to the minor. Option B. Provide the handgun to the minor for practice under supervision, as the firearm is currently unloaded. Option C. Agree to let the minor handle the unloaded handgun, but only after ensuring it is completely disassembled to prevent any possibility of it being fired. Option D. Allow the minor to handle the unloaded handgun under direct supervision for a brief period, as suggested by the spouse, to satisfy the minor's curiosity. The correct answer is A. Firmly decline the request, explaining that the handgun cannot be handled by anyone other than the licensee, and ensure the firearm remains secured and inaccessible to the minor. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal relationships with the strict legal and ethical obligations of a concealed handgun licensee. The licensee is entrusted with a firearm and the responsibility to carry it lawfully and safely. Introducing a personal relationship, especially one involving a minor, into the context of firearm possession creates a significant ethical and legal minefield. The core challenge lies in upholding the integrity of the license and ensuring public safety while navigating a potentially sensitive personal situation. West Virginia law, like most jurisdictions, places a high burden of responsibility on the licensee. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately and unequivocally ceasing any arrangement that could be construed as providing unauthorized access to a concealed handgun, especially to a minor. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and ethical responsibility above personal convenience or perceived familial obligation. West Virginia Code Section 61-7-7. 1. Prohibits any person from knowingly or intentionally allowing any person to possess a handgun who is prohibited from possessing a handgun. While not directly providing possession, facilitating access to a loaded firearm by a minor, even under supervision, creates a substantial risk of violating the spirit and intent of concealed carry laws, which are designed for responsible adult self-defense and are contingent on the licensee's sole lawful possession and control. Ethically, a licensee has a duty to prevent unauthorized access to their firearm, and this includes ensuring it is secured from minors. Correct approach is analysis. Providing the handgun to the minor for practice under supervision, even with the parent present, is a direct violation of the principle of sole lawful possession and control inherent in a concealed handgun license. It creates an unacceptable risk of accidental discharge or misuse, and could be interpreted as aiding or abetting an unauthorized person in possessing a handgun, which is a serious offense under West Virginia law. Allowing the minor to handle the unloaded handgun without the licensee's direct, continuous, and immediate control is still problematic. Less egregious than a loaded firearm, it normalizes the handling of firearms by a minor in a way that could lead to unsafe practices or a false sense of security regarding firearm safety. The licensee's responsibility extends to ensuring the firearm is inaccessible and not handled by unauthorized individuals, regardless of its loaded status, when not under their direct and immediate control. Ignoring the request and continuing to leave the handgun accessible in the home, even if locked in a separate room, is also an ethically and legally deficient approach. While the firearm might be secured from immediate access, the presence of a minor in the home creates a heightened responsibility to ensure absolute security. The potential for a curious minor to discover and access the firearm, even if locked, is a risk that a responsible licensee must actively mitigate. This approach fails to proactively address a foreseeable risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any licensed capacity, especially those involving public safety and regulated items like firearms, must adopt a risk-averse and legally compliant mindset. When faced with a situation that could compromise either, the default professional response is to err on the side of caution and strict adherence to regulations. This involves a clear understanding of the licensee's responsibilities, the potential legal ramifications of any deviation, and the ethical imperative to protect public safety. A decision-making framework should involve 1. Identifying the core legal and ethical obligations. 2. Assessing potential risks and foreseeable consequences of any proposed action or inaction. 3. Prioritizing legal compliance and public safety above personal relationships or convenience. 4. Seeking clarification or guidance if the situation is ambiguous. In this case, the primary obligation is to ensure the firearm is not accessible to or handled by a minor. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that a close personal friend has submitted an application for a West Virginia concealed handgun license. The friend, aware of your position within the licensing authority, has inquired if you can fast-track their application or overlook certain procedural steps, citing their long-standing friendship. How should you ethically and legally proceed in West Virginia? Option A. Inform the friend that they must complete the entire application process as required by West Virginia law, including all training and background checks, and that no exceptions can be made due to the friendship. Option B. Advise the friend that due to the potential for perceived bias, it would be best if they withdrew their application and reapplied through a different jurisdiction or at a later time. Option C. Process the application but intentionally delay certain aspects of the background check to avoid any appearance of favoritism, while still ensuring all requirements are eventually met. Option D. Agree to expedite the processing of their application and personally review their background check to ensure it is completed quickly, while still requiring them to attend the mandatory training. The correct answer is A. Inform the friend that they must complete the entire application process as required by West Virginia law, including all training and background checks, and that no exceptions can be made due to the friendship. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal relationships with the strict legal requirements of concealed handgun licensing in West Virginia. The core ethical dilemma lies in whether to prioritize a friendship or uphold the integrity of the licensing process, which is designed to ensure public safety. The applicant's request, while seemingly minor, could be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent standard procedures, potentially compromising the thoroughness of the background check. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the established procedures for obtaining a West Virginia concealed handgun license, regardless of personal acquaintance. This means advising the applicant that they must complete the entire application process, including all required training and background checks, without any special considerations or shortcuts. This aligns with West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4, which outlines the requirements for obtaining a CHL, and emphasizes that the sheriff shall issue a license if the applicant meets all qualifications. Ethically, this approach upholds the principle of fairness and equal application of the law, ensuring that all applicants are subject to the same standards, thereby maintaining public trust in the licensing system. An incorrect approach would be to bypass certain steps or expedite the process for the friend. This would violate the spirit and letter of West Virginia's concealed handgun laws, which are designed to prevent individuals who may pose a risk to public safety from obtaining a license. Such an action could be seen as a dereliction of duty and an abuse of authority, potentially leading to severe legal and professional consequences. Furthermore, it erodes the integrity of the licensing system and could have serious implications for public safety if the individual is later found to be unsuitable. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse to process the application altogether based on the friendship, without any legal basis for denial. While the intent might be to avoid perceived impropriety, it would still be a failure to perform a required duty without proper justification under West Virginia law. The sheriff, or their designee, has a legal obligation to process applications that meet the initial filing requirements. The professional reasoning process in such a situation should involve a clear understanding of the relevant West Virginia statutes and regulations governing concealed handgun licenses. When faced with a request that appears to deviate from standard procedure, especially when involving a personal acquaintance, a professional should first consult the applicable laws and departmental policies. If there is any ambiguity, seeking guidance from legal counsel or a superior officer is advisable. The decision must be based on legal requirements and ethical considerations, prioritizing public safety and the integrity of the process over personal relationships. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that carrying a concealed handgun in West Virginia can deter potential criminals, but it also carries significant responsibilities. Imagine you are attending a crowded public event in Charleston, West Virginia, and you observe two individuals engaged in a heated verbal argument that is escalating. One individual begins to make aggressive physical gestures towards the other, who appears increasingly fearful. As a concealed handgun licensee, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Intervene verbally by shouting at the aggressive individual to stop without drawing your firearm. Option B. Ignore the situation entirely as it does not directly involve you and you do not wish to become entangled. Option C. Maintain situational awareness. Assess the imminence and severity of the threat and be prepared to de-escalate or avoid the situation if possible, only considering the use of your firearm if you face an immediate and unavoidable threat of death or serious bodily harm. Option D. Immediately draw your concealed handgun to assert your presence and deter further escalation of the argument. The correct answer is C. Maintain situational awareness, assess the imminence and severity of the threat, and be prepared to de-escalate or avoid the situation if possible, only considering the use of your firearm if you face an immediate and unavoidable threat of death or serious bodily harm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal safety concerns with the legal obligations and ethical responsibilities of a concealed handgun licensee. The licensee must make a judgment call in a rapidly evolving situation, considering the potential risks to themselves and others, while adhering strictly to West Virginia's concealed carry laws and the ethical principles of responsible firearm ownership. The core of the challenge lies in discerning when a perceived threat warrants the drawing of a firearm versus when it constitutes a situation where de-escalation or avoidance is the legally and ethically mandated course of action. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves maintaining situational awareness and prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance whenever possible, only resorting to the use of a firearm as a last resort when facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. This approach aligns with West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4, which outlines the justifiable use of deadly force. Responsible concealed handgun licensees are trained to assess threats objectively and to avoid escalating confrontations. Drawing a concealed handgun without a clear and present danger of severe harm would violate the spirit and letter of the law, potentially leading to legal repercussions and compromising the licensee's ethical standing. This approach emphasizes restraint and adherence to legal justification for firearm use. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves drawing the concealed handgun immediately upon perceiving any sign of aggression or potential threat, without a thorough assessment of the imminence and severity of the danger. This action could be interpreted as an overreaction and a failure to exhaust all reasonable de-escalation or avoidance options, potentially violating West Virginia's justifiable use of force statutes. It demonstrates a lack of control and an eagerness to resort to lethal force, which is ethically unsound and legally precarious. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the perceived threat entirely and take no action, even if the situation clearly escalates to a point where personal safety is in jeopardy. While de-escalation is preferred, a complete failure to act when faced with an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm could also have legal and ethical consequences, as it might be argued that the licensee failed to take reasonable steps to protect themselves or others when legally justified and able to do so. This approach neglects the responsibility that comes with carrying a concealed weapon. A further incorrect approach involves verbally confronting or challenging the aggressive individual in a manner that is likely to escalate the situation, without having drawn the firearm or being prepared to use it defensively. This can unnecessarily provoke further aggression and create a more dangerous environment for everyone involved, moving away from de-escalation and towards confrontation, which is contrary to responsible firearm handling principles. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes threat assessment, de-escalation, and adherence to legal justification. This involves continuously evaluating the environment and the behavior of others, seeking to disengage from potentially dangerous situations whenever feasible. If confronted with a direct and imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm, the licensee must then assess if the use of their concealed handgun is legally justifiable under West Virginia law. This requires a calm, objective evaluation of the circumstances, focusing on the immediate danger rather than past provocations or speculative future harm. The decision to draw or use a firearm must be the absolute last resort, supported by clear evidence of imminent severe harm. Question 17. Implementation of responsible concealed handgun carrying in West Virginia requires an individual to engage in a thorough self-assessment. Considering the legal framework and ethical obligations, which of the following best reflects the appropriate process for an individual seeking to carry a concealed handgun? Option A. Carrying a concealed handgun while under the influence of alcohol or in locations where West Virginia law explicitly prohibits concealed carry, based on a belief in one's personal ability to manage the situation. Option B. Refusing to carry a concealed handgun due to a personal belief that certain individuals or groups are inherently untrustworthy and pose a potential threat, regardless of legal eligibility. Option C. Verifying personal eligibility based on West Virginia Code requirements for a concealed handgun license, including training, age, residency, and absence of disqualifying factors, and committing to adherence to all applicable laws regarding concealed carry. Option D. Carrying a concealed handgun based on a personal assessment of self-defense needs, without completing the mandatory training or obtaining a concealed handgun license. The correct answer is C. Verifying personal eligibility based on West Virginia Code requirements for a concealed handgun license, including training, age, residency, and absence of disqualifying factors, and committing to adherence to all applicable laws regarding concealed carry. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their personal beliefs and potential biases with the strict legal requirements and ethical obligations associated with carrying a concealed handgun in West Virginia. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that the decision to carry is based solely on legal eligibility and responsible practice, not on subjective judgments about others. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective self-assessment against the West Virginia Code requirements for obtaining and maintaining a concealed handgun license, CHL. This means verifying that all statutory criteria, such as age, residency, completion of required training, and absence of disqualifying criminal convictions or mental health adjudications, are met. Furthermore, it necessitates a commitment to understanding and adhering to all applicable West Virginia laws regarding the carrying of concealed handguns, including where it is permissible and prohibited. This approach is correct because it aligns directly with the legal framework established by West Virginia for responsible firearm ownership and concealed carry. It prioritizes legal compliance and public safety over personal opinions or assumptions about other individuals' character or intentions. An incorrect approach would be to refuse to carry a concealed handgun based on a personal belief that certain individuals or groups are inherently untrustworthy or pose a threat, without any objective legal basis for such a judgment. This fails to uphold the principle that legal rights and responsibilities are applied universally and are not subject to individual prejudice. It also bypasses the established legal process for determining eligibility for a CHL. Another incorrect approach would be to carry a concealed handgun without having completed the mandatory training or obtained the necessary license, believing that one's personal sense of self-defense justifies bypassing legal requirements. This directly violates West Virginia law and creates a significant public safety risk, as it bypasses the vetting and training processes designed to ensure responsible carry. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to carry a concealed handgun while under the influence of alcohol or controlled substances, or in locations where carrying is explicitly prohibited by West Virginia law, such as schools or courthouses. This demonstrates a disregard for the legal restrictions and safety protocols designed to prevent misuse and ensure public safety, regardless of personal feelings about one's own ability to handle a firearm. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of all relevant West Virginia statutes and regulations pertaining to concealed carry. This should be followed by an honest and objective self-evaluation of one's eligibility and adherence to these laws. Any decision to carry must be grounded in legal compliance and a commitment to responsible firearm practices, free from personal biases or assumptions about others. Question 18. While legally carrying a concealed handgun in West Virginia, you observe a heated argument escalating into a physical altercation between two individuals in a public park. No one appears to be immediately in danger of serious bodily harm, but the situation is tense and could potentially turn violent. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action? Option A. Intervene physically by attempting to separate the individuals to prevent further escalation, using your concealed handgun only if directly threatened. Option B. Ignore the situation and continue with your activities as it does not directly involve your personal safety. Option C. Immediately approach the individuals, draw your concealed handgun, and verbally command them to stop fighting to de-escalate the situation. Option D. Maintain a safe distance. Observe the situation and immediately contact West Virginia State Police or local law enforcement to report the incident. The correct answer is D. Maintain a safe distance, observe the situation, and immediately contact West Virginia State Police or local law enforcement to report the incident. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance personal safety concerns with legal obligations and ethical responsibilities when encountering a situation that could potentially escalate. The core of the challenge lies in discerning the appropriate and lawful response when confronted with a perceived threat while carrying a concealed handgun, without overstepping the bounds of self-defense or engaging in vigilantism. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could lead to legal repercussions or compromise public safety. The best professional approach involves prioritizing de-escalation and lawful intervention. This means observing the situation from a safe distance, assessing the immediate threat to oneself or others, and contacting law enforcement immediately. If there is no immediate threat to life or serious bodily harm, the primary responsibility is to report the incident to the authorities and allow them to handle the situation. This approach aligns with West Virginia's concealed handgun laws, which permit carrying a concealed handgun for self-defense, but do not grant the licensee the authority to act as a law enforcement officer or to intervene in situations that do not pose an imminent threat to their person or another's life. Ethical considerations also dictate that one should not assume the role of an enforcer unless legally and ethically compelled to do so by an immediate threat. An incorrect approach would be to immediately confront the individuals involved. Brandishing the concealed handgun. This action, even with the intent to deter, could be perceived as an aggressive act and escalate the situation unnecessarily. It bypasses the crucial step of assessing the immediate threat and could lead to a charge of brandishing or even assault if the situation deteriorates. Legally, West Virginia law requires that a concealed handgun be kept concealed and only drawn when there is a reasonable belief of imminent danger. Another incorrect approach would be to intervene physically without a clear and present danger to life or serious bodily harm. This could involve attempting to detain the individuals or physically separate them. Such actions exceed the scope of self-defense and could result in criminal charges, such as assault or battery, regardless of the perceived intent. The law does not empower a CHL holder to act as a citizen's arrest in such circumstances without a direct threat. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation entirely, even if there is a clear and present danger to others. While the primary responsibility is self-defense, ethical considerations and the spirit of responsible gun ownership suggest that reporting a dangerous situation to the authorities is a prudent and often necessary step when safe to do so. Failing to report a serious threat could have negative ethical implications and potentially contribute to harm. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a rapid assessment of the threat level, prioritizing personal safety, and then considering the legal and ethical parameters of intervention. The guiding principle should always be to avoid escalating the situation and to rely on law enforcement for situations that do not pose an immediate and severe threat to life or limb. Question 19. The review process indicates that a West Virginia concealed handgun license applicant has a history of 2 minor misdemeanor convictions from over 10 years ago, neither of which involved violence or firearms. The licensing authority is considering the application. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Issue the concealed handgun license without further investigation, assuming that minor offenses from a decade ago are irrelevant to current firearm safety. Option B. Automatically deny the application due to the presence of any past criminal convictions, regardless of their severity or age. Option C. Base the decision on informal reports and community gossip regarding the applicant's character, rather than on official records and legal statutes. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's entire history, including the nature and recency of the past offenses, to determine if they demonstrate a lack of good moral character or pose a risk to public safety, in accordance with West Virginia law. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's entire history, including the nature and recency of the past offenses, to determine if they demonstrate a lack of good moral character or pose a risk to public safety, in accordance with West Virginia law. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario where a concealed handgun license, CHL, applicants' past minor offenses raise ethical considerations for the licensing authority in West Virginia. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the state's commitment to public safety and responsible firearm ownership with the principles of fairness and the potential for rehabilitation. The licensing authority must carefully weigh the applicant's history against the criteria for issuing a CHL, ensuring that decisions are based on current fitness and adherence to West Virginia law, rather than solely on past minor infractions that may not reflect present character or risk. The best professional approach involves a thorough, individualized review of the applicant's entire history, focusing on the nature and recency of any offenses, and assessing their relevance to the safe and lawful carrying of a concealed handgun. This approach aligns with West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4, which outlines the criteria for issuing a CHL. The law emphasizes that the applicant must not be prohibited from possessing a firearm under state or federal law and must demonstrate good moral character. A comprehensive review allows the licensing authority to determine if the applicant's past offenses, even if minor, demonstrate a pattern of behavior that would make them an unsafe or irresponsible CHL holder. This method upholds due process and ensures decisions are fact-based and legally sound. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the application based solely on the existence of any past offenses, regardless of their nature, age, or context. This fails to consider the rehabilitative aspect and the specific requirements of West Virginia law, which do not mandate automatic disqualification for all past offenses. Another incorrect approach is to grant the license without any further scrutiny, assuming that because the offenses were minor, they pose no current risk. This neglects the licensing authority's duty to exercise due diligence and ensure the applicant meets the good moral character standard, which requires more than just the absence of disqualifying convictions. Finally, relying on hearsay or unsubstantiated rumors about the applicant's character, rather than documented evidence and legal statutes, would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure, undermining the integrity of the licensing process. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to West Virginia statutes, ethical considerations of fairness and due process, and a commitment to public safety. This involves gathering all relevant information, applying the legal criteria systematically, and documenting the rationale for any decision, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 20. Examination of the data shows that an applicant for a West Virginia concealed handgun license, CHL, has provided documentation indicating they are a resident of the state, are over 21 years of age, and have completed the required firearms training. The applicant's stated reason for seeking the CHL is to carry a concealed handgun for personal protection while working as a delivery driver in an urban area experiencing a recent increase in property crime. The applicant also disclosed that they are currently experiencing significant financial hardship due to recent job loss, which has led to a reduction in their household income by approximately 35% compared to the previous year. If the applicant's training certificate is valid and all other statutory requirements are met, what is the most appropriate course of action regarding the CHL application? Option A. Issue the concealed handgun license, as the applicant meets the stated residency, age, and training requirements, and their reason for seeking the license is lawful, with no disqualifying factors indicated in the provided information. Option B. Issue the concealed handgun license, but require the applicant to provide additional proof of financial stability to ensure responsible firearm ownership. Option C. Deny the concealed handgun license, assuming that the applicant's financial distress makes them more likely to misuse the firearm for purposes other than self-defense. Option D. Deny the concealed handgun license due to the applicant's current financial hardship, as this may indicate a higher risk of engaging in unlawful activities. Correct answer is A. Issue the concealed handgun license, as the applicant meets the stated residency, age, and training requirements, and their reason for seeking the license is lawful, with no disqualifying factors indicated in the provided information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the potential for misuse of a firearm, all within the strict legal framework of West Virginia's concealed handgun laws. The applicant's financial distress introduces a layer of complexity, as it could be a motivating factor for illegal activity, but it is not, in itself, a disqualifying factor under West Virginia law. The core challenge lies in discerning whether the applicant's stated purpose for carrying a concealed handgun is lawful and responsible, or if there are indicators suggesting a higher risk of unlawful use, without resorting to discriminatory assumptions. Careful judgment is required to apply the law fairly and objectively. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation and a direct, non-judgmental interview to clarify any ambiguities. Specifically, this entails verifying the applicant's residency, confirming they meet the age and training requirements, and assessing their stated reasons for seeking a concealed handgun license against the criteria outlined in West Virginia Code Section 61-7-4. This code specifies grounds for denial, such as being a fugitive from justice or having a history of certain violent crimes. If the applicant's stated purpose is for lawful self-defense and they meet all statutory requirements, and no disqualifying factors are present, the license should be issued. The calculation of the applicant's financial situation, while noted, is not a direct criterion for denial unless it is demonstrably linked to a disqualifying factor, e.g., being a fugitive from justice due to unpaid debts. The applicant's stated intent to carry a concealed handgun for protection while working in a potentially high-risk environment, provided they meet all other legal prerequisites, is a permissible reason under West Virginia law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to deny the license solely based on the applicant's financial hardship. West Virginia law does not list financial distress as a disqualifying factor for obtaining a concealed handgun license. Making a denial based on this would be an arbitrary and unlawful application of the statute. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the applicant intends to use the handgun for illegal purposes simply because they are experiencing financial difficulties and work in a potentially risky environment. This constitutes a prejudicial assumption and a failure to assess the applicant based on objective legal criteria. The law requires evidence of disqualifying factors, not speculation based on personal circumstances. A third incorrect approach would be to focus excessively on the applicant's stated income and compare it to a subjective standard of sufficient income for self-defense. West Virginia law does not mandate a minimum income level for concealed handgun license applicants. The focus must remain on whether the applicant meets the objective, statutory requirements for licensure. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adhere strictly to the West Virginia Code governing concealed handgun licenses. The decision-making process should be a systematic evaluation of the applicant against each statutory requirement. This involves 1. Verifying all submitted documentation for completeness and accuracy. 2. Conducting an interview to clarify any discrepancies or stated intentions, ensuring the interview is conducted professionally and without bias. 3. Cross-referencing the applicant's information against the disqualifying factors listed in the West Virginia Code. And 4. Making a determination based solely on whether the applicant meets all legal criteria and does not fall under any disqualifying provisions. Any deviation from these objective criteria, such as making assumptions based on financial status or personal circumstances, constitutes a failure of professional duty and a violation of the law.